Hello, thank you. Yeah, pleased to be here. I came all the way from Alaska, so the other side of the continent. I'm here with the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy and excited to share one of my favorite topics with you guys, Alaska and sustainable energy and our renewable energy quest in Alaska. Alaska is a really diverse place linguistically. The red tribes in the middle are part of the Great Dene Nation language family, so we have some connections to the lower 48. But Alaska is made up from a lot of different tribes, contrary to popular belief. There's not a monolith up there. We have over 229 federally recognized tribes and many, many language groups as well in our community. And just getting into the history of Alaska a little bit, the first contact with settler colonization was through the Russian-American Fur Trading Company that came to my region first, the Aleutian Chain, and then made its way all the way down to the northern part of the San Francisco Bay Area where Fort Ross is at. And so my people were seafaring people that, as you can see here with the kayaks and the Russian ships, we were masters of the sea, and the Russians utilized our navigation abilities to further their endeavors. And then we faced the second wave of colonization with the American coming in with Sheldon Jackson's plan for assimilating Alaska Natives into the broader society. And I'd heard about this map for a long time, but I'm glad I finally found it, because they say that it has a lot of similarities to our Alaska Native Regional Corporations Act. In 1971, there was the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act that was passed, and it did a really different approach to federal Indian law in Alaska, where 12 Native corporations were created by an act of Congress, not an act of self-determination. And those Native corporations were allocated 44 million acres of land in Alaska. And there's also, similar to the tribes, there's 220 plus Native village corporations. The regional corporations have subsurface land rights, and the village corporations have surface land rights, and all the land is held in fee simple title. So it's quite a different situation. I've been I guess pleased to be able to work with the Alliance and try to explain some of these differences that we have in the unique Alaska context. We also have regional corporations that have nonprofits that go along these regions. And so a big part of the Alaska organizing experience is working through these multi-layers of Alaska Native organizations and tribes. And sometimes they're on the same page, sometimes they're not. But just to give the diversity of Alaska and how many communities we have here, I just wanted to share this slide with all the different Alaska communities, and most of these are going to coincide with these are federally recognized tribes. So we have over 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska. That's about 43% of the tribes in the United States. And I think another interesting statistic is that 50% of tribes have less than 1,000 members. So it's not like they're a monolith. They can be a really small community all the way up to some of the larger tribes with hundreds of thousands of members. Just to give an example of how big Alaska is, it stretches all the way from California to Florida here, and from Texas to North Dakota. So when we try to talk about Alaska as a whole, it's like talking about the whole United States when it comes to climate, geography, just the different aspects. It's a huge place to try to deal with. And then if you look also at this map happens to be AVAC, and it's Alaska Village Electric Co-op. And this is the amount of communities that they serve throughout Alaska. So it's about 60 communities that won utility services throughout the state. So we have some big players in the utility space, but we also have locally tribally run utilities as well. So it can span the whole gambit from large to small in terms of who you're dealing with. What the resources and capacity of the utility is can really vary quite significantly. A big part of Alaska's history has been with oil development on the North Slope. A large reason for the Alaska Native Land Claims Settlement Act being passed is that there is a lawsuit filed in large part due to Willie Hensley, and that lawsuit was going to be resolved in some fashion, and that fashion was the Land Claim Settlement Act. So I think it was the best kind of making of a complex situation. Prior to that, there was no recognition of tribes by the state, and there was no land allocated to Alaska Natives other than a very few Native allotments that had been passed through under the 1930 Allotment Act. But just to go into some of the logistics for Alaska, when we sell our oil, we don't get to use it. We don't have large-scale refineries in Alaska. We basically purchase our diesel fuel and heating oil and gasoline from California. So trying to bring this up to Alaska is a logistically complicated exercise, and it can be very expensive, just to put it out there. A lot of these are semi-monopolies, and there's not any type of mechanism that, because Alaska is rich in oil and we export a lot of oil, that we get some kind of discount on that oil when it comes back to us. We pay a pretty penny for it. And a lot of Alaska's oil use is through heating. So the slide here shows rural communities and heating of our homes using almost 80% diesel is how we heat our homes in rural Alaska. And this can be with diesel fuel starting at $5 a gallon if we're lucky, but $10 a gallon, $15 a gallon, and upwards is not unheard of. And so trying to address some of the, I think, I live in the rail belt system where it's a little different. We have natural gas there, but I definitely appreciate the situation that folks in rural Alaska are dealing with and the high cost of heating our homes. And one of the, and if you look on the bar graph with the PCE areas, you can see that the folks in rural Alaska are using far less energy as compared to the rest of Alaska. So it's not like people are living in, they're going without sometimes, or they're doing much less energy consumption than a typical American household, so to say. So this is on how communities in Alaska are generating their electricity. So all the red triangles are diesel energy production. That's an exception to the rail belt, which we call it, which is this area in South Central Alaska. So we have, I think, 187 standalone power systems in Alaska that are diesel-generated systems. And with diesel generation comes some opportunities for energy efficiency improvements, but also it's some of the most expensive ways to generate electricity in the world, really. So trying to transition away from diesel energy, diesel electric production is, I think, a goal that I would love to see happen in my lifetime to transform that. Just on some of my personal background, my grandfather was the first Alaska Native to earn an engineering degree from the School of Mining and Engineering, and he built a lot of the airports in these communities during the World War II. So I feel like in following my family's heritage, that I have some responsibility to make a contribution to Alaska as a whole, and hope that transitioning off of diesel onto renewable energies is a part of that legacy to leave behind. And so this is some of the energy efficiency improvements of using heat recovery in Alaska. So we have, it doesn't have a statistic to come along with this, but there are efforts to do heat recovery from the diesel energy production so that it's slightly more efficient. But that's not, that's some of the planning that the Alaska Energy Authority is providing help with. But getting into renewables, Alaska definitely has its wealth of renewable energy resources. According to a report that was done, 134 rural communities have viable wind resources. So out of the 187 standalone power systems, 134 have a viable wind resource that could be utilized to heat the homes or to run the lights or to provide electrical energy production. And most of that's in western Alaska. We don't have as much in interior Alaska, but it's definitely a resource worth exploring. I think some of the challenges with wind, though, is with moving parts comes maintenance, and especially at 20 degrees, 30 degrees below zero, that wear and tear on the systems can be pretty significant. So there's, while there is resource there, I think working with companies that design their systems to have harsh Arctic environments is really important to keep in mind. And we have probably enough marine resources, which includes offshore wind, tidal, and wave energy production, I think, to power the United States several times over, with 3,800 gigawatts of energy viability in the state as just a raw resource. And so I think exploring the different types of technology in Alaska is having an all-above approach is really important. There's opportunities for to getting off fossil fuels in a multitude of ways, including geothermal power. Being on the Ring of Fire, the Aleutian Chain has a lot of renewable energy resources, as you're probably aware of. A lot of these resources are site dependent. So if you're luckily in a community that has geothermal resource, it's a stable baseload power source that can provide clean and carbon-free energy to your community, as well as heating. And I was privileged enough to study in Iceland at the School for Renewable Energy Sciences, where Iceland is a leader in geothermal energy technology, and also having some really great hot springs there. So if you like to visit the hot springs in the world, I know I'm a hot springs fanatic. So wherever I go and there's a hot springs, I try to jump into it. The Iceland has plentiful amount of hot springs, and if you come to Alaska, you should try to check out Chena Hot Springs. It's a great place to soak in the water, and that's in South Central Alaska, and one of the middle ones. So yeah, and they have a great renewable energy fair out there as well. So shout out to Bernie, who's up at Chena Hot Springs. And we also, even though we've used relatively a little amount of fossil fuels in Alaska in terms of villages, we're some of the first communities to see impact from climate change. We have about 30 villages that are imminently threatened due to climate change, from coastal erosion, thawing permafrost, river erosion, a variety of rising sea level, and also some of these communities were not cited in the best places. I was trying to find a map to show where boarding schools were built at, coordination with village sites, and I've heard stories of that some communities were cited simply where it was convenient for the barge operator to drop off the supplies to build the boarding school, and then the community, of course, came to be around where their kids were being held at. And so I think that in terms of community planning, under the process of colonization, if you want to call it that, a lot of communities weren't cited in the best systems because as being nomadic people, we would shift to different places depending on the community, but there was a lot more movement historically given the seasons as opposed to being settled in permanent communities as the way is now. But I think there's also there's a potential opportunity here with village relocations to do greenfield sustainable community development and to do technological leapfrogging so that we're able to deploy, I think, the next generation of smart grids, of building energy efficiency houses, and to really, with the spirit of tribal self-determination, to see Native communities have the potential of leading in sustainable community development. And so I feel like that's idea of indigenous leadership and the transition to a regenerative economy and a regenerative energy system, that Alaska Native communities have the possibility to be global leaders, and hope that we could leverage those opportunities, especially with the deployment of renewable energy systems. And this is another slide on all of the impacts from climate change of communities in Alaska. So you have we're on the front lines when we talk about 1 degree C of global average temperature rising. We see about 6 degrees in the Arctic, and the Arctic Circle is kind of coincides with the mountain range on northern Alaska. And I think going into the next slide in terms of trying to coordinate all of this is an immense task, and trying to just join on with the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy, being the Alaska-based representative. It's been slightly overwhelming to try to deal with the 229 federally recognized communities we have, with many of those experiencing a really high cost of energy. And so having a approach that works, and I think this is also where I start to talk about the Power Cost Equalization Program, which is a unique subsidy that was created in Alaska to try to balance out the high cost of energy and the investment that we saw on the rail belt to rural communities that lost out on that investment in infrastructure and access to cheaper natural resources, natural gas, and the like. So I think the part of the challenge with deploying renewables in Alaska is hindered by the PCE to sometimes, because it was guaranteed as a diesel subsidy, basically. And so if you try to install renewables as a utility, you simply use less diesel, and therefore you get less PCE funds. And so that's kind of almost completely opposite from like a feed-in tariff regime that you would see in Europe, where you have guaranteed prices for renewables. Those prices make economic development investments make sense. Usually those the compensation is higher than cost avoided, which is what we're dealing with in the United States. Contrary to the beliefs of capitalistic markets functioning in the United States, the electricity market is very much different from that, given the way that it's regulated, and in particular the way that communities in Alaska had the PCE program, especially in rural Alaska, affecting the deployment of renewables and the regulatory environment when it comes to that. Probably not as applicable to most of the audience here, but my fellow Alaskans hopefully can appreciate some acknowledgement of our regulatory environment. And this is an old slide, but I don't know how many people are paying like more than like 50 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity? Like that's what we're dealing with here in the red dots in Alaska. And it's a majority, and this is an old slide, so that's gone up to over $1.60 a kilowatt hour in Alaska. And we're dealing with some of the highest costs of electrical production in the world for a lot of reasons. So hopefully to get some hope here, we have an example of a solar array that was installed, and I believe that this project was saving around $125,000 a year in diesel oil. And as it was set up in order to work with the Power Cost Equalization Program, the community created an independent power producer that was a separate entity from AVAC. And then the power was sold to AVAC, and because AVAC was able to count those funds towards the PCE, it kind of worked. It was a workaround that made sense for both the tribe as well as for AVAC. So it gave the tribe about $100,000 of annual revenue that they could use for other projects, which I think this model is probably going to be replicated in multiple other communities. It seems like this is, for right now, the best way to go in terms of deploying renewables and still having the community be able to access the full share of power cost equalization funding and subsidies. Some other success stories of Alaska. This is Kodiak. This is where my grandfather was born at. They're nearly 100% renewables, thanks in large part to hydro. Some people say that hydro doesn't count towards renewables, but I think hydro counts towards renewables. Does anyone else? Like, is anyone a hydro fan here? I hope so. I think that, of course, appropriate scale too. but Kodiak is an example of a community that's been able to transition nearly completely off of diesel fuels. We have another project that was done by the regional corporation that I'm a shareholder of, which is Cook Inlet Region Incorporated. They did a wind project on Fire Island, which is just outside of Anchorage, and this project was one of the first commercial scale wind energy productions in the state. And so I feel I'm glad that it was my native corporation that was able to kind of spearhead the way and the deployment of renewables at a commercial scale in Alaska. And I would encourage people to think that that's not, that we can be leaders in adopting technologies, we can be leaders in deployment of renewables across the country. This is the largest solar voltaic array in Alaska. It's 8 megawatts. And they were able to come in at, I think, about 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour for this 8 megawatt facility, which actually is stabilizing the cost of electrical production in Alaska and the rail belt, which is coming in below the cost of natural gas as it is right now. So I think that's a real success story to show that even though that we're beating the cost of natural gas, even in Alaska with a limited solar resource, we're stabilizing the cost of electricity in the region. And that's, I think, a great success story to share. So if solar is viable in Alaska, it should work wherever you guys are at. Another example of innovative tribal leadership in helping to commercialize and deploy emerging technologies is Igiugig. They've been working with ORCP to develop an in-stream hydrokinetic system. And this is an example of a tribe working with a company that's developing, commercializing a technology that hasn't been proven somewhere else and has had some learning curves to it, but it shows that tribes can be real innovators in the energy space. And because of the high cost of energy, that we're able to work with companies to deploy emerging technologies that are maybe that it shows that Native people can be leaders of innovation, which I think is a really important point to make, is that some people say that there isn't, that tribes and innovation don't go together, but I think this is an example where tribes can be leading innovation into the future. And just getting into some of the mechanisms that we have in Alaska in terms of the state actually did pass and create a renewable energy fund. It's deployed nearly $300 million to renewable energy projects across the state and raised a significant amount of matching funds. And we just were able to, there was a lapse in the 10 years of the program initially created. For a year it lapsed, but now it's been extended indefinitely. So we have a state mechanism that's supporting renewables. Of course, more funds could be allocated to this given the scale of Alaska's needs, especially in rural communities in the transition to renewables, but at least there's a vehicle to do that. And so if you want to hear more about the Alliance, we're going to have a panel today at 3:15, so please stick around and hear from my esteemed colleagues at the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy. It's a really exciting organization to be a part of. I've already traveled from Hawaii to Florida and back from Alaska and being a part of the team, and it's been a great experience to see how tribes can lead the transition to clean and affordable renewable energy. So stay tuned for more about the Alliance and our no-cost services for tribal clean energy development. And a special thanks to the Seminole Tribe for having me here all the way from Alaska. It's been great to be here with you. It was 22 below when I left home. So it's been a nice little break to talk about renewable energy and get to network with everyone here. And I guess if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Just gonna take the mic for people. Does anybody have any questions?
Here we go. My bad, I was in there. Reading the schedule.
You're right on time.
I was just joking. I was sitting out there the whole time. I was gonna quote that thing off of Friday, but no, I was just out there. I was out there watching you, listening the whole time.
I think that's
Do
what
we
I'm
have
finding
any
here.
questions? Okay, all right, coming back in here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Amy Wilson, and I work a lot with Metlakatla Indian community. So I'd like to talk to you, but I don't have any questions. I just want to say I really enjoyed your presentation and all that you're doing. It's really interesting. So just wanted to tell you that.
Good stuff. Thanks for the words of encouragement.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Where else are we going here? All right. Rob. Let me guess, Rob. Here you go. Oh, yeah. Oh.
Teamwork.
Thanks, David. Very inspiring. So, in a perfect world, how do you see, the tribes kind of get to energy sovereignty? Like in your perfect world, how do you see that happen?
Yeah, well, I think that's why I'm so excited to be a part of the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy, because we are working on a nationwide basis to both advance and address the small-scale problems we have in Alaska. I feel like there's a unique opportunity to deploy microgrid energy technologies that would scale up there because of the high cost of energy, that we're able to ideally also get licenses and intellectual property rights to those technologies so that we have a sustainable revenue stream in perpetuity from those. And I think also with the Alliance's work on looking at utility scale projects, that tribes can develop renewable energy projects that help to lead the country towards a transition and away from decarbonizing our energy systems in a way that's a just transition. And so I really feel like that Native people have an opportunity to be included in this transition in a way that the attendance of this room really shows that Native people want to be a part of the transition to clean renewable energy away from fossil fuels, and that we can lead in that endeavor.